Welcome everybody to this week's webinar. Our webinar this week kicks off our track that we're having on small orchard management. So today and the next 2 weeks we'll be covering topics in small orchard and growing fruits in Illinois. Today we have Rick Weinzierl with us. Dr. Weinzierl is an extension entomologist and a professor, and it's Department of Crop Sciences, right, Rick?
Correct.
Right. And we on the Small Farms team work very closely with Rick, and he provides a lot of support to us. So glad to have Rick on today. So with that, Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, everybody. Hello. Let's just jump right into this. I've tried to tailor this for folks who have enough trees to call it a small orchard, so let's say a dozen or 15 or so, and fewer than 200, because by the time you get to that size, you're approaching 2 acres or more, and you're not a small orchard anymore by many standards. We'll try to talk about things for conventional or organic growers. I will, though, sort of talk about folks who would strive to produce marketable fruit. Now, the market might not be what you're actually going to use it for, meaning you may keep it all yourself, but I'm going to aim for folks who want to produce something marketable. The focus is on apples and peaches, and it should carry over a little bit for some of the insects in cherries, plums, nectarines, pears. And you'll need to do some homework on some of those on your own. I'm going to list a lot of insects and say we'll cover the main ones, and you've got the names to look up on Google for some of the others. We'll do a brief discussion of a couple of major insects and small fruits as well. This isn't my part of the topic, but I would encourage you, if you think you're going to buy more trees, to always buy them from reputable nurseries. Nothing against Lowe's and Home Depot, but it's not the right place to buy good fruit trees. Choose disease-resistant varieties where you can, and plant trees that have been grafted onto dwarfing or semi-dwarfing rootstocks. If you don't want a shade tree, don't plant on an old seedling rootstock, because it's pretty hard to manage for fruit. So let's talk briefly about who the major creatures are in these tree fruit crops that you grow in your orchard. The direct pests, the ones that actually go into fruit, are plum curculio, codling moth, and apple maggot as the major players. Oriental fruit moth a little bit in apples, especially in the south and southwest where apples and peaches are grown together. There are a number of other things that may damage fruit directly, and I'm going to leave those alone and tell you, if you're interested in more detail, look those up. The indirect pests that are important on the twigs, the leaves, the roots, whatever it may be, the parts of the plant we don't eat, are San Jose scale and the rest of this long list here, including one you probably ought to look up called potato leafhopper. It's a pest that shows up on a wide variety of plants, shows up on the leaves and causes curling and distortion. And if you look up for a few pictures of it, you may notice that you've probably seen some damage from it in past years. Common pests of peaches that we'll talk about will be oriental fruit moth and the stink bugs and plant bugs. And we'll talk about creatures that don't damage the fruit itself. The most important ones are peach tree borer and lesser peach tree borer. And if we pick just a couple of really important ones from small fruits that you might have in your orchard, which then is not entirely an orchard if it's got small fruits in it too, but that's okay. The small fruit pests that are especially important are spotted-winged Drosophila and Japanese beetle. Now, some of you may have been on a similar presentation like this last year when I talked about fruit insect control, and probably directed it more to larger growers, but the same thing is true now as was for that audience. If you do nothing to control any of these insects, in peaches and apples where they've been established a while, you'll have 70 to 100% of the fruit that can't be marketed because it's infested or damaged by insects. For late season raspberries, the same thing is going to be true once this new insect, spotted-winged Drosophila, shows up. And losses will be a little less in strawberries or blueberries. Spotted-winged Drosophila may change that as well, but those are the crops with the least insect damage historically to the fruit itself. Lots of backyard growers grow these fruits without ever doing anything directly to control insects, but you often do so because you're willing to cut out the damaged portions of fruit, which is fine, but it's not commercial. It's not marketable. So the old approach to doing this, be it even homeowners or big fruit growers, was except during bloom, you kept an insecticide residue on the tree most of the time to kill the insects that might go into fruit, because we maybe didn't know when they were going to enter, didn't have good methods to determine that. So there were pre-bloom insecticides, pink petal fall, and every 2 weeks until harvest approached. And there were similar sort of calendar scheduled treatments in other fruits. These obviously had problems. They cost a lot. They left residues on fruit. They killed natural enemies. They made pests resistant. So clearly the right idea would be to move away from this, and that's what the legal requirements for most pesticides require you do now anyway, the label requirements. And so this old approach is not one I'd encourage you to stick with. What I think you would do, and the rigor at which you're going to approach this is dependent on how much you want to produce insect damage-free fruit. But the basic things are you would apply something called a dormant oil, superior oil. That's going to go on before the blossoms start to show pink in the spring. No sprays during bloom until all the petals or almost all the petals have dropped from trees and bees are no longer foraging. And then you might use things that are simply called petal fall sprays. They're identified as that because of that timing. And then after that, everything else you would do would be based on monitoring or scouting for pests. There are a few cultural practices you can use. You can bag apples. I'll show you a picture of that. You can encourage some natural biotic control by keeping plants that are flowering in bloom with small flowers and good pollen and nectar sources for parasites and predators that help a little bit. In general, you're probably not going to do anything about buying and releasing predators outside. They generally don't work very well at all. So for apples and peaches, dormant oil, delayed dormant oil, whatever you would call it, it's going to go on before bloom, is for control of San Jose scale, European red mites, and rosy apple aphid eggs. You're going to use an insecticide right after petal fall for an insect called plum curculio in apples, and plum curculio, stink bugs, and plant bugs in peaches, and then you're going to scout or monitor trees to decide what to do. How are you going to know anything about any of these creatures? If you're looking for a couple of general references on insects in general related to fruits and vegetables, the Intro to Applied Entomology class here is available on the web. You can see the syllabus at one link, and you can look at the lab that's specifically related to fruit and vegetable pests. And there's a great book called Garden Insects of North America by Whitney Cranshaw, probably the best general identification book any of you could buy if you want to have something in paper and print in front of you when you're looking at things. There are some good online and in-print references that are specifically for tree fruits and small fruits. The two in this slide are about tree fruits. The one on the bottom is one that you actually have to buy the printed copy, but it's pretty inexpensive. The one on top you can see online or buy in print. And for all of you who may not have been on before, I know that after these end, the PowerPoints are posted on a website, or the presentations as a whole, and you're able to go back to these and see the links and use them, so you don't have to try to write them down just as I read them off. There are a couple of pocket guides, just small 3x5 little booklets that you can use that have great identification of insect and disease problems in apples and peaches that you can view online or you can order from Michigan State University. And there are similar references about the insects and, for one of these, the diseases of small fruits as well. So raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, grapes. The things I've talked about so far are mostly guides to identifying what you might see if it's an important pest in those crops. Then there are a couple of guides that sort of take this into a little more information about how does the insect pass the winter, when does it occur, how many generations occur. And these two guides, the Tree Fruit and Small Fruit Pest Management Handbooks, cover that kind of information for insects as well as plant pathogens and some weed problems in fruit crops. So these are good background if you want to understand who the insects are so that you know better what to expect you have to do about them. We're going to tell you to monitor for insects, and basically the tools you need for the fruit insects are a hand lens to look closely at leaves, a beating tray, which is what you see in the picture in the middle at the right, and I also tell you that if you got an old styrofoam cooler with a lid, why you just turn it upside down and use it under the foliage of a tree. You jiggle or whack on the branch. The insects that are there that you don't see easily drop into the beating tray, and you know they're there. That's a way people sample for plum curculio and for stink bugs in tree fruits. The guidelines, I'd probably start with the scouting guides and then look at the other references I gave you a slide or two above. And then the source for this equipment for most everything is going to be a company called Great Lakes IPM. They're readily findable on the web if you just type in the name of the company. And the traps let you monitor the presence of adult insects that are otherwise not all that easy to see, and they tell you when those insects are likely to be laying eggs on fruit or on apples and peaches especially, and that gives you an idea when you need to control them. And we'll go a little deeper in that in just a moment. If you are looking for what do you use traps for and why, the things you're usually going to use them for are codling moth in apples, apple maggot in apples, and oriental fruit moth in peaches. And there's a summary of using traps, whether you're a homeowner or a commercial grower, in the Illinois Fruit and Vegetable News. That particular one is a couple of years old, and we'll probably put another announcement similar to it into this year's newsletter. You're going to buy a white trap. Usually it's going to be something called a large delta trap. You buy a lure for the species that you're trying to trap, and you just put one kind of lure in each trap. And you make out a form that says date and the number of moths you caught. And you keep track of it, and you'll be able to use that to know when those insects are laying eggs and when they are likely to need to be controlled. If you call up Great Lakes IPM, they will sell you kits for homeowners, and we'll get into that in a little more detail. You're going to know what you're going to spray, and we'll go through these insects in a moment. You're going to know what you might want to spray, and you're going to say, or what you want to control, and say, what can I spray to control them? The Midwest Tree Fruit Spray Guide is meant for commercial growers. You can get to it online as a PDF, and you can read the whole thing. There are chapters on apples, peaches, plums, cherries, and I think that might be it, pears. Similarly, there's a Grower's Guide to Organic Apple Production that's on the web. And if you are, and take no offense by my saying just, if you're just a homeowner with a few trees to protect, take a look at the publication called Pest Management for the Home Landscape. And that one you have to order as a paper copy. It's not available completely online. The difference is, as you decide you're going to grow commercially, you can buy larger containers of pesticides. Perhaps you get a pesticide applicator's license, and you will have access to some different chemicals. If you have 3 backyard trees and the smallest container of something you buy would treat 300, that's probably not a product that you want to buy. So you're going to choose from some different things, and I'll make a couple of notes about those in a minute. So the Midwest Tree Fruit Spray Guide with pictures of the apples on the front is revised every year. And realize, folks, this is not entertaining literature. This is a list of pesticides at the time they can be applied for the pests, insects, diseases, whatever that may be a problem at that time in the progression of a fruit crop from bloom all the way to harvest. There will be lots of listings of pesticides for any given pest, maybe not lots, but in some cases several. It doesn't mean you use them all. It means you choose one, And if you happen to grow apples and peaches, or you happen to grow apples and raspberries, or you happen to grow apples and sweet corn, you start to say if there are any products, look to see if there are any products that are listed for all of those crops that might allow you to buy one instead of buying 4 different ones. So there are lots of options. It doesn't mean you spray them all, it means you choose one. Similar spray guides for small fruit. And again, the production guides for organic production of small fruits include one for blueberries, one for grapes, and one for strawberries. I don't know of a similar one for raspberries and blackberries, but these all give you specific control recommendations for specific problems. So let's go back to what you're doing in apples and peaches and a couple of small fruit problems. Pre-bloom in apples, you use something called an emulsifiable oil or a dormant oil. You can buy this at every level, from the Lowe's or the FS that sells to gardeners all the way up to 50-gallon drums for big orchard managers. You mix these products in water. If you're spraying well before bloom, you mix them at 2%, so 2 gallons per 100 gallons. Volume of oil to volume of water. If you spray a little later, you get close to pink and there's some blossoms showing color. You spray 0.5 to 1% by volume. What this does, an emulsifiable oil disperses in water. You spray it on the plants, the water evaporates, and a very, very, very fine coat of this highly refined oil coats the twigs and the creatures on the twigs, so San Jose scale, rosy apple aphid eggs, and red mite eggs, and it suffocates the eggs. You can't use these at the same percentage all the way through the season, because once you get foliage on plants, and especially if it's hot, then these oils can tend to cause some damage to foliage. But early on, they're great. If you can get 2 sprays on between green tip, when you first see some green foliage coming out of buds, and the time you spray with up all the way up to pink, if you can get 2 on, that's great. And you can use all sorts of equipment to do this. I got a note that says, good luck with a Hudson trombone sprayer. It will reach high. That's a good idea. I'd encourage you to prune your trees so you don't have to reach quite so high, but I understand. The good thing about these is they really don't cause any significant damage to beneficial insects or no resistance issues. They do a lot of good for a little bit of money with almost no side effects at this time. And there are lots of these that are approved for use in organic production. In fact, most of them are. Just a reminder, some of you may see more of this insect and maybe not even know what it is. This is San Jose scale on the surface of apples and on the peach twig. This is an insect that creates a covering over itself. There is a live tiny insect underneath these little bumps, these little hard covers. And it's been an increasingly significant problem in commercial orchards over the last decade or so. It's probably due to the fact that they don't use a couple of insecticides anymore that used to be quite effective against it. But I think it's also because we're just in a population cycle where numbers are high. They have lots of woody plant hosts that are not fruit crops. Populations are high. So when you see them on fruit at the end of the year, you get these little red circles around the scale, and that's a chemical in the apple. It's a reaction to damage. You can go right ahead and eat these, by the way, but it's hard to sell them that way. Anyway, that's what you're after with that dormant oil spray for San Jose scale. You get to bloom, you don't apply any insecticides. You hang codling moth traps, these pheromone traps. So that codling moth in the picture on the upper left is about 3/8 of an inch long. It flies at night. It's not easy to go out and say, yep, I see some moths flying now. I know I'm going to need to spray when the eggs hatch. It's a lot easier to put a trap out that has a little lure in the middle that has the pheromone that the female gives off to attract a male. You catch the males, you know the females are flying at the same time, and you make an application so many days later according to the time that eggs would hatch. And if you don't make that application, or you don't somehow control codling moth, you see what's in the fruit in the upper right picture. If you've got a small orchard, you use at least 3 traps. If you're in an urban setting and you've got 2 or 3 apple trees and the guy a block away has got 2 or 3, each of you, or buy buy a kit of 3 traps from Great Lakes IPM and put up 1 in each of your backyards. You're going to hang these during bloom. Now in a minute I'm going to talk about the fact that you can use pheromones directly to control insects if you have a large enough orchard. If you're going to do that, it's called mating disruption, and we'll talk about that. The mating disruption dispensers would be applied during bloom in apples. At the same time you'd start to put out traps to capture moths if you're going to control them otherwise. Mating disruption simply says instead of putting a pheromone in a trap in a single lure to catch a few moths and be an indicator of population timing and density, and then you're going to spray afterwards, you could put out an awful lot of pheromone. And it would prevent males from finding females, because that's what the pheromone's used for. And you would not then need to use any insecticides against those insects that you can disrupt by the use of dispensers. It works, but it doesn't work in a single tree. For this to work, you have to have an orchard that's at least a quarter acre in size, and think of an acre as the size of a football field, give or take. You ought to have a couple dozen, 3 dozen trees, all nice and tightly packed together, and nice and I guess just cohesive, where you don't have a tree here, a tree there in your landscape. The reason for that is this only works if there are lots of dispensers in a small area and the moths are mostly coming from the area where the dispensers are. So it works in small orchards, but not in just isolated trees. These are little plastic twist-tie dispensers, and they're available for controlling codling moth, oriental fruit moth, and peach tree borers. This is what they look like. The one on the left is one that you just wrap around the twigs. The one on the right, you just pinch it from end to end and slide it over the top. And again, these produce enough pheromone to keep males from finding females, and that's why they work. So now you've gotten past bloom, you've either put out mating disruption or you put out traps. You're going to start to monitor the traps. You're going to start to look for all sorts of insects. Pretty much once a week, you just go out and look at twigs and branches, look at the traps you put out, and you look at the Pest Management Handbook for details on scouting all these insects. At petal fall, most all commercial growers and a lot of backyard growers who truly want to have apples without a lot of damage on them will spray for an insect called plum curculio. Pretty much you can say, I need to spray for plum curculio if it damaged my fruit last year or the year before and I sprayed last year to prevent it. If you got a lot of woods around you or you're in an urban area with lots of other people's trees around you, that's good habitat for these. The effective sprays you can use include Imidan and Assail if you have access to those as a commercial grower, even small scale. 7 for a homeowner. There are some pyrethroids, I'll list a couple later, that are effective. You try not to use the 7 in pyrethroids in sizable orchards because they trigger outbreaks of European red mite. They kill the natural enemies of the mites. Most homeowners can get away with using these if you choose to. Now, none of those are organic. If you're trying to do organic insect control in apples, this is probably the toughest pest to do well. The way you can do that is with Surround, which is a kale and clay product, plus Pyganic, and you spray 3 or 4 times from as soon as the bees are gone, basically once every 2 or 3 days for about 2 weeks. So here's what plum curculio damage looks like on apples. The weevil is what the adult curculio is. The weevil passes the winter, comes onto trees about the time the blossoms drop, and when apples are about the size of a dime, they start chewing holes and laying eggs, and you see the scars on the apples in the lower right. If you saw a lot of that last year, you will see a lot of it this year. It's pretty much a good predictive indication. Codling moth. This is the one that you really do have some organic options for. It's also the one that gets inside lots of fruit if you don't do anything about it. It's an introduced pest, introduced to North America over 200 years ago. It winters as mature larvae. They pupate in the spring and fly to apple trees. They lay eggs on the fruit especially. The larvae hatch. They don't eat it all until they just crawl into the fruit. So they chew a hole through the skin, and that's the only external feeding they do. Now, for the long history of apple production, since basically lead arsenate in the 19-teens and 20s, the approach to controlling this insect has been to make a spray every couple of weeks so there's a residue on the fruit, because we didn't know when the moths were flying. Now we do know that because we can use the traps, but from the 1960s till now, it's been mostly organophosphate insecticides, and then in recent years, the commercial growers have gone to a lot more of the reduced risk, more effective products, and still less risky than anything else. Entrust is a OMRI-listed product you can use in organic production that's very effective, probably even much more effective than codling moth granulosis virus, which you can use in organic production. Again, if you're a backyard grower, take a look in the Home Fruit Pest Management Guide, and there are a number of products you can buy at Lowe's or Farm and Fleet that will do some good. The reason people use those traps is when the males are caught in traps, you know females are flying. Females are flying, they're laying eggs the next day. It's going to take a certain amount of time measured in degree days for those eggs to hatch. And the day after they hatch, they're inside the fruit, and there's nothing you're going to do to get rid of them once that's happened. So the basic idea has been to say the eggs hatch at around 240 degree days. So if I just monitor the average temperature every day, subtract 50 from it, that's how many degree days I get that day for this particular insect, and I'll count until I get close to 220, and then I'll make a spray. And then I'll keep looking at the traps, and through the rest of the summer I'll spray if the traps keep catching moths a certain number of degree days after the traps are catching moths. If they're not catching moths, you don't need to keep spraying, and that's true for a homeowner or for a commercial grower. So degree days sounds a little complex. In some ways it is. There are 3 different references here to sites that give you information on degree days. The first one is just the general idea of what are degree days on the Illinois State Water Survey website. The second one shows you a little bit about calculation. And the third one, I believe, is the link to the picture I put on the right. So if you were to go to this, you could find your town, you can pick the pest that you want to talk about degree days for, and let's say it were codling moth, we'd click on codling moth, and in my case champagne, and I would get a question that said, when did you first start catching moths? And I'd put that in, and it would tell me how many degree days have accumulated. We then use that kind of information for a lot of locations around the state, and in the Fruit and Veg newsletter every summer we do some periodic updates about what is the status of codling moth as far as its stage for infecting fruit at different places in the state. So we have Murfreesboro in the south up to Lake County in the north. So we'll give you some guidelines for how to use that degree day information. Second insect that's really important in apples is apple maggot, or the third one, excuse me, the second one that turns out as a worm or a larva in the fruit at harvest. This is a native pest to North America. If you are south of I-70 in Illinois, it really isn't a problem. And if you have an orchard where you've controlled it all the time, it often doesn't resurge very much. If you're in town, it's a very, very common pest. There's one generation a year. It winters in the pupal stage. The flies become active in late June, typically. You start trapping in early to mid-June. Maybe you start catching them in late June or early July. When you catch moths on a trap, you make a spray. You wait 2 weeks, put up a trap again, and see if you catch more. Excuse me, I said moths, I meant flies. And you spray again. It's a very distinctive creature. The marking on the wing is always that heavy dark pattern, sort of an F shape at the tip of the right wing, and they always have the white spot at the back of their thorax, front of their abdomen, the one that's right in the center of that insect. So it is identifiable. The trap that people use doesn't use a pheromone. It's not something that's male and female communication related. It's just a red sticky ball. So you buy the red spheres, you coat them with stickum, and when you catch flies, you make spray decisions accordingly. It's really easy to control with cover sprays, and I'll list some of those in a minute, but it's also really gross if you don't control it, because you can see what it looks like in the picture at the bottom. So that's apple maggot in an apple. Now, there's going to be a lot of products you can use. If you're an organic grower, the choices become fewer. You can use mating disruption against codling moth. You can use codling moth virus or Entrust if you spray them fairly frequently. There's a product called GF120 that's a great bait for apple maggot control that works effectively. It has the same thing in it as Entrust. BT, which if you're an organic grower you've used for other things, is really not effective against codling moth because the active residue, toxins or spores on the surface of treated fruit breaks down really, really quickly, and the codling moth only takes one little bite in one little spot before it goes in, so if it doesn't eat it, it's not controlled by it. So BT isn't usually very effective against codling moth. You can use the pre-bloom oils against San Jose scale and mites and aphids. Japanese beetle is tough if you're growing them organically. Nematix and pyrethroids are usually the best. Lots of mixed data on Entrust. It doesn't perform consistently. Something that a lot of backyard growers will do is just bag fruit to keep insects out of it. So this is bagging of fruits in a backyard orchard. Just look up bagging apples for insect control and you'll get lots of pictures of products. I would tell you don't buy the ones that look almost like they are a little footy for women's pantyhose-like fabric, a little footy to put on inside a shoe that doesn't show. Presumably those work, but they also break down in just a few weeks, so I think you'd be better off with the small paper bags that are sold for bagging apples to keep insects off of them. If we go to peaches, we switch to something that's sort of the equivalent of codling moth. It's oriental fruit moth, and it will show up in apples late season, but it really doesn't occur in any numbers except in parts of the country where we have some peaches around too. You can use traps to monitor them just as you would for codling moth. You can call up the folks at Great Lakes IPM and say, I need a trap kit for codling moth and oriental fruit moth, and they'll send you one with 3 traps in it and tell you how it works and all that kind of thing. Or you can email me and I'll do the same. It used to be controlled quite a bit in commercial orchards by the whole group of insecticides called pyrethroids. There are problems with resistance to that in Calhoun County, the peach growing area north of St. Louis. So they've switched to some new products and some old ones like Imidan. Again, we'll come back to some smaller scale ones in a minute here. Stink bugs and plant bugs on fruit stick their beak or feeding stylet into the fruit when it's small, and it grows in a distorted fashion around the cells that are killed by the stylet when the bug sticks its beak into the fruit. And there's a bunch of them out there. They're typically controlled in commercial production by pyrethroids of one kind, and there are a couple of pyrethroids available for home fruit application, but there are really no good organic problems for stink bug control. Lots of things tested, none of them worked very well. And there are a bunch of different stink bug species, probably a dozen or so that we see commonly here, but almost 4 dozen that are common in the eastern part of North America. That wasn't enough, however, so we imported a new one accidentally about a decade and a half ago from China in shipping containers called brown marmorated stink bug. It's established as far west as Indiana, and we have lots of isolated detections of it here, but no reports of field damage yet here. Winters as an adult 2 generations a year, causes a lot more damage than the ones we had before, harder to control, and is likely to build up in big numbers like it has in the east. So keep an eye out for this creature. It will be tougher to control. You can see the kind of damage you get on apples and peaches. It's typical stink bug damage. It's going to be an atypical stink bug and be more numerous and harder to control. The other major pest of peaches, or pests, are not ones that go into the fruit, but they go into the trunk. The picture on the left is damage from peach tree borer, which is sometimes called grater peach tree borer. It's one where the adults lay eggs near the base of the trunk, and there's a female in the picture in the middle on the bottom. Lesser peach tree borer is a tiny bit smaller, and the female lays eggs up in the scaffold branches, and the larvae tunnel in the bark like you see in the lower right. These will kill trees, or at least kill limbs in trees. In fact, one of the big reasons historically that people planted a Japanese plum or a flowering cherry, and it started growing as a single trunk and then turned into a bush, was because these things girdle the single trunk, and you start to get a lot more new trunks, and they girdle those in sequence as well. You can monitor these with pheromone traps. There are lures specifically for them. Great Lakes IPM can help you get those. And I don't mean to plug them over somebody else, but they are pretty much the only Midwestern company that sells traps for orchards and vegetable producers and those kinds of folks. So they know what they're doing, and they're helpful. You put the traps out, you say, I put out a trap for lesser peach tree borers, a specific lure for it. You catch some borers in the spring of the year, typically late April, early May. You wait about 7 or 10 days and make a trunk spray. And if you've had a lot of trouble, a lot of damage from this insect, you make another one after harvest. There are some products labeled for use commercially that you probably wouldn't get as a homeowner. Lorsban 4EC is one of them. But there are a number of pyrethroid products that are sold to smaller scale growers and homeowners that do work just fine. And if you haven't had a lot of damage, you just make the May application and you don't make a second one. Greater peach tree borer, the bigger one, starts a little bit later. It's going to be the one that causes damage right at the base of the tree and even just below the soil line. You put out a trap for it, you catch moths, and you start to make a spray. 10 days after flight begins, and the spray goes just on the base of the trunk up the first 12 to 15 inches. After the flight peaks in August or after harvest, you could spray again if you needed to, and that's sort of the same time as a second lesser peach tree borer spray. If you've got an isolated tree or two, these things do cause a lot of damage, and I'll admit I've lost a couple of peach trees to peach tree borer. If you've got an orchard, and at this point we could say, you know what, if your orchard is half apples and half peaches and altogether it's a quarter acre, you can still use these things. It's just you have to use the codling moth disruptor on the apple trees and the peach trees. You got to use the oriental fruit moth ones on the apple trees and the peach trees, and the same thing for this peach tree borer mating disruption product. There's one product out there that works against both of these insects. It's very effective. It's just it's not going to really work right when you've got 3 trees in your backyard like I do now. Can't make it work. So the picture is the twist tie like product you use. They go on at 150 per acre, and they work very, very well. And then the other picture is just because it was in the slide. Terrapin scale is sort of a minor pest of peaches, and it shows up there in the photo. Some quick coverage of small fruits. Spotted wing Drosophila, I suspect many of you have heard of. It's going to be the new bane of all small fruit production, especially things like raspberries and blackberries that we tend to pick in mid to late summer and even well into the fall. This is one that was accidentally brought here from Asia as well, almost certainly in shipments of fruit, of small fruits. It's called spotted wing Drosophila because it's a fruit fly with spots on its wings for the males. And this is the same size as all those little fruit flies you see in your kitchen every summer. It's just a different species. We know it occurs in the counties with stars in them. I suspect it occurs in 80% of the ones that don't have stars in them. This insect is present in Illinois. I suspect you'll find it in every county in 2014. You see the size in comparison to a red raspberry or to a strawberry in the lower right. And the crops that are at greatest risk are thin-skinned fruits. So strawberries, raspberries, cherries, you read the list on the left-hand side. raspberries and blackberries especially, because they are the latest harvested crop in that list. And the reason that's important is these things will winter with modest success. A lot of them will die, but they'll still winter even this year. And populations will build generation by generation every 10 days to 3 weeks throughout the summer, so that by late season we have a lot more of them. Peaches are susceptible. We've reared them out of peaches here at the Urbana Orchard for U of I. Apples less so, tomatoes a little, but if you have tomatoes late in the season and there's nothing else around, they're going to be more susceptible. And lots of wild hosts. You go to southern Illinois and pokeweed is pretty much a common roadside bit of landscape, and it's all going to support spotted-winged Drosophila. Pheromone traps attract insects from a distance, or you only see them if they're already nearby. They won't attract from a long distance, but the ones that are pheromone traps for the peachtree borer, oriental fruit moth, codling moth are attracting only males. So you don't worry about bringing in an insect that's going to cause a problem, because they can't lay eggs or do anything, and they don't feed as adults. So pheromone traps never really cause an increase in a population in a place where you put them. And they don't sample from that far of a distance. To monitor for these things, you use a deli cup with holes poked in the side of it. You put vinegar in the bottom as a bait, hang a little yellow card in it if you choose, so it's easy to see the flies, and you put it in the shade wherever there is ripening fruit beginning to color. And you check at least weekly. If you start to catch flies, you need to control them. And the link at the bottom of this slide has some greater detail about exactly how to make those traps. Here's what the flies look like on the little yellow cards. The males have spots on their wings. The females don't have spots on the wings. What the females have is what makes this such an evil little creature. For fruit growers anyway, and that's the back end of the creature on the right, which is a female, bears an ovipositor, an egg layer, and you can see the serrated edges, the little sawtooth-like edges on the back end of that ovipositor. It allows it to abrade fruit and lay eggs inside, and that's something that none of the other Drosophila species, fruit fly species we have, can do. That's why this one is so different. If it's present and you don't want to eat maggots with berries, and that sounds a little gross, but that's the reality. If it is present in your planting, you've found the flies, you've got fruit ripening over the next 2 weeks, it will be in fruit. It's sensitive to several different insecticides, sprayed at about 5 to 7 day intervals, less if you use Pyganic as an organic product. But you have to be pretty careful about bee poisoning here, because most of the products that will kill this insect will also kill bees, and so you have to spray in the evening when bees are not foraging. If you use a liquid insecticide applied when the bees are not active, you will not cause big problems with bee kill. If you use a wettable powder where the little particles of the spray are left afterwards, then you have more damage, and if you spray when the bees are active, you'll kill more bees. And you need the bees in these crops, folks. They are what pollinate them and help to set fruit. So removing overripe fruit can minimize breeding sites, and yes, indeed, if you could make an enclosure, put fine screen or row cover all around it, you could keep spotted-winged Drosophila out of a berry planting. But you'll also keep the bees out, and then you have to worry about pollination. So it's going to be a tough creature. I've listed all the insecticides that are labeled and effective here. If you are a commercial grower of small fruits, you would probably buy even an acre, a half acre, a quarter acre. You would probably buy Brigade or Mustang Max, because they have a lot of labels on small fruits. You might buy a sale. If you also grow some tree fruits, it's effective. If you are a homeowner, you might have to rely on things like malathion and Pyganic. Pyganic is labeled for use in organic production. So is Entrust, and Entrust is an effective product. Just make sure you use the liquid formulation, not the wettable powder. And then our last favorite insect before we wrap a few things up, Japanese beetles. I don't think any of you need too many pointers on how to identify them. They're pretty well known. The larvae feed on the roots of grasses. The adults feed on, depending on whose estimates you like, 275 to 400 different plant species feeding on the foliage or the fruits. It's been spreading across North America for about 100 years. And the map, the frontal line on the map there that gets us to Illinois, that was back in the late 1990s. Usually a couple of years, 3 or 4 years after they first appear, the populations are highest, and you think they are just absolutely intolerable, terrible, the end of the world. And after that, they drop back to being just terrible most years. Japanese beetles overwinter in the soil as larvae. They feed on the roots of a number of plants. They emerge typically beginning in July, and we can waffle on that a little bit depending on how far south or north we are in the state. But adults are often present for 6 or 8 weeks in a given location. They don't just emerge, mate and lay eggs and die. They're around for several weeks, often from sometime in July through early September. They feed on fruits and foliage of pretty much all the fruit crops we would think of. Usually they're gone by the time grapes are ripening. They're gone by the time most apples are ripening, but they feed on the foliage of those crops, and quite a problem, as many of you know. I would tell you, don't buy traps for Japanese beetles. The traps do tell you when they're present. They do not catch enough insects to, quote, trap them out in reduced numbers. If you have a typical urban lot that's well less than a quarter of an acre, you'd probably need about 20 of these to do anything, and you'd probably still have more Japanese beetles in your yard than next door, because a lot of them would have come to the trap in your yard but not been caught. They do not work. You'd never know that by all the advertisements. Insecticides you can use, a number of them. Neem and pyganic are labeled for organic production. Entrust is really not effective, but all these others are common insecticides that you can buy even as a small-scale orchardist or small fruit grower. The one thing you need to know is, you can use an insecticide in apples and it provides control of codling moth for 2 weeks if it isn't washed off by heavy rain. It doesn't last that long for Japanese beetle, because the tiny, tiny residue that's left after a spray is enough to kill some tiny, tiny little insects. It's not enough to kill some great big insects like Japanese beetle, especially insects that have a lot of good detoxifying enzymes like they do. So let's go back and just say, you got all these bugs, you got all these issues. What are some things that you might be able to use? If you are a small-scale commercial grower and you want to choose a small number of conventional insecticides that you could use, you'd probably say, I always have to have Superior Oil for the spring, or a dormant oil product. You might have either 7 or Imidan on hand for Japanese beetles, plum curculio, whatever it might be. Imidan is no longer sold, though, in homeowner-size packages. So you got to be big enough to buy the smallest commercial bag. For codling moth and oriental fruit moth control, you would probably choose either a sale or a sale and delegate, because they would do as much good for as many different insects as you could, but they actually work against codling moth that's resistant to these older products. For stink bug, you'd probably want to have a pyrethroid. Remember, the ones you buy from a true ag chemical supplier, all of the pyrethroids are restricted use products, so you'd have to have a private applicator's license. I will tell you folks, that's not that hard to obtain. It doesn't cost that much. If you're trying to sell $1,000 of fruit every year from a small orchard, you ought to have a private applicator's license. If you've got that, you'd pick Mustang Max, Danitol, or Warrior. And you might have a miticide on hand, or you might just figure you could use a summer oil if you had to. If you picked a miticide, acromite's probably the one. So those would be the things you might consider. If you are a backyard grower and you're willing to use conventional insecticides, You're still going to need some of these general use products. You can buy Superior Oil. You can buy 7 as Carbaryl as 7 or another product, or malathion, and they do a fair bit of good. They aren't as good, but you don't have quite the same standard if you're not trying to make a living on a thin profit margin. There is a pyrethroid product out there that's labeled for use on fruit trees that I am aware of. There may be more, but it's the only one where I could actually find the label said fruit trees, and that's Bonide 8, which is, of course, a play on the old name 7 for Carbaryl. For codling moth, there are products that contain spinosad. They include Conserve, Gardens Alive one, or sells one that they call Bullseye bioinsecticide, and if that wasn't a catchy enough name for you, Bonide sells a spinosad product called Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, which you'd buy just for the name, right? Anyway, you might choose what the Lowe's and Home Depot sell, the multi-purpose fruit spray. Contains malathion, Carbaryl, and Captan. And honestly, I've put that stuff out in insecticide trials, and it works modestly well. For a backyard grower, it's absolutely fine. And some of the organic products will be in the next slide. What I need to remind you of, though, is a lot of that stuff you buy in a Home Depot or a Lowe's or the Home Garden Center will say right on the label, not for commercial use, which means you are not supposed to sell the produce that you treat with it. Now, in all honesty, if you use 7 that said not commercial use or 7 that doesn't say that on it, it's the same residue on the fruit. So in some of these cases, you would not have any different tiny trace of residue considered to be safe if you used a product that said not for commercial use or one that says something else. But technically, folks, the label on a pesticide is the law, and you're supposed to follow it. You can mess with the ingredients in Aunt Jemima's pancake mix or in the brownies you make on the stove, but you can't mess with the ingredients in insecticides and say, well, I sprayed it the way I wanted to, that's okay. It's not. That's actually against the law. So be a little bit aware. For organic growers, remember, if you're just big enough, mating disruption is really the way to go against codling moth, oriental fruit moth, and peach tree borer. If you're not big enough for that, codling moth virus is good for codling moth, and trust is good for codling moth and oriental fruit moth and peaches. This GF120 product is organic labeled. Again, these are the same products I mentioned before. The one I put in here is there are formulations of fungal insecticides made from fungal pathogens of insects. Nicotrol is one. There's a MET53 or MET52, which is metarhizium. And in general, they just aren't all that well matched to the insects you find feeding on fruit. So while they do have value in certain circumstances, I probably wouldn't think they're the best for you. So, a little plug at the end here for the newsletters that we put out from Extension here and next door in Indiana. The Illinois Fruit and Veg News is free online. If you take a look at it and like it, you send me an email and we add you to the list. Every time there's a new issue posted, you get a notification. And Purdue's newsletter is good as well. The things these help you with is just an understanding of what's going on at a given time in commercial crops. And even if you aren't trying to sell yours, it's still nice to know what's going on. So I think that's the last slide I have in the list, and I can take questions for a couple of minutes if you have some.
I want to make another plug in addition to Rick's for the Illinois Fruit and Vegetable News. The small farms educators, horde educators around the state, we all contribute to that in every issue, so you get a good snapshot on what's going on all across the state, and you can get some specific reports for your area. So we would really encourage everyone to sign up for that online newsletter. It's free online, so the price is right, and a lot of good information in that.
And usually so a joke or two at the end of each issue.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So any questions for Rick, type them into the chat box.
Bag one apple at a time or more than one. Typically, you thin the cluster to 1 apple per cluster, and you bag 1 apple per cluster. But honestly, for most backyard trees, you'd get so many apples out of that. And if you're trying to grow commercially, obviously that doesn't fit beyond about the third tree or so, unless you got a lot of 8-year-olds nearby who think it's fun. Is there a recipe for creating your own dormant oil? No. These things are a and I'm not a good petroleum chemist by any means. They are refined to a particular range in terms of what volatiles come off, what things you get rid of, and then they have an emulsifier in them, so that you buy this little container in the hardware store or someplace. The cost of that is very low in general. Even if you go up to the size of buying these big drums for commercial orchards, the cost per acre is exceedingly low. And I don't know of any way you would make your own and have it emulsify, leave the right film on twigs and leaves, and also not cause damage to the plant. I'm never a fan of homemade stuff, and I don't think you could do this one anyway. I should say a fan of homemade pesticides. I think that's usually a bad idea. Is KDL good for frost protection on apricots? Not that I know of, and that's not my specialty. I don't know that anything is truly good for frost protection, despite what they say in the materials. I'm assuming this is one of the ice inhibitor type sprays or something that you're supposed to put on blossoms. I don't know it, so I'm out of my league there. I don't know the answer. I doubt that it is. Is the snow we are having going to suppress bug numbers? No. That's an easy one. Yeah, there'll be a few things that are not quite as numerous this year as in a mild winter. There'll be other things that are just absolutely fine. So, have you heard of using phosphate spray, which changes the taste of the fruit to bugs and keeps them off? I have not, and if it's not a labeled pesticide, I would really rather you didn't decide to make things up, although I don't know what phosphate we're talking about there.
Just a note on the snow and cold with the insects. Mother Nature has the perfect antifreeze, wouldn't you say, Rick?
Yeah, most of these things are quite good at reducing the amount of water and increasing the amount of sugar in their cells, and they end up with, as Kyle said, sort of an antifreeze. Most of the things that we always have problems with are pretty well established here, and they're used to winters, even though we'd like to think it's going to freeze them. Remember, Japanese beetle seems to do fine pretty much every year in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It'll probably do fine here. How about beneficial nematodes for the larvae stages of pests in the soil? It would be valuable for peach tree borers, even feeding on the base of plants. Plum curculio does not winter in the soil. You'd have to have multiple sprays as they're coming out of fruit on the soil surface. Codling moth and oriental fruit moth do not winter in the soil. If we have something that's a root-infesting creature, yes. Otherwise, I don't think they play very well. I've got one here that says, how soon to spray dormant oil temperature-wise? Typically, anytime after green tip of foliage, meaning the first foliage starts to show, but not if the forecast is for a freeze, again, within the next 48 hours.
There's one for apple cedar rust, but actually Mohammed Babadoos will probably cover that in 2 weeks, I would think, right, Rick?
Yeah, if it's a cedar apple rust one, I'd prefer, yeah, let's let Mohammed answer that. There are some fungicides for it, and if you ever plant any new trees, you might take a look at some of the ones that are cedar apple rust resistant.
Yeah, and in 2 weeks, our small orchard program will be on managing diseases, so Dr. Babadoos will cover that.
Okay.
Okay, looks like we got everybody caught up, Rick. I think we're good to go. Thanks for being on here today, for presenting for us, and thanks for everybody being on today.